Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of History in Flames, where we take people, places, and events of the past and make it relevant to us today and to our future. My name is Mike Smith, and I appreciate you coming along with me for today's journey. Today, we're going to talk about the postbellum era of America. And we're going to be talking more specifically about the entrepreneurship, examples of what's going on with the economy, and so on as part of our American history. Now, many of you are asking, what is the postbellum era for America? I'm going to specifically be talking about the 1865 to 1900 time frame. And as I usually like to put my students in the place of what we're talking about in the time, the Civil War has just ended. The South is slowly starting to rebuild after a devastating defeat. And Americans are starting to look westward to expand our nation and to improve our opportunities. Now, what does that mean for everyday people? Well, not a whole lot. And you really can't talk about this unless you give an example of a person during that time. I'm going to use the example of one of my personal heroes, Robert Smalls. He was formerly a slave who became a very successful politician. His story is one of resilience, ambition, and economic transformation of the time. And he mirrors the broad changes that are happening in our country. So, settle in and let's talk about Robert Smalls. Now, who was Robert Smalls? Robert Smalls was born in 1839 in South Carolina as a slave. And he had an affinity for boats and shipping and the sea, the waterways and everything. So his slave masters, owners, put him on a ship and started teaching him the ways. When he became an adult and he was married and had his own children, he pulled off one of the most daring, brazen escapes we've ever heard of as far as Americans. And that was in May 13, 1862, where he not only impersonated the captain of the ship, but sailed the Confederate ship through a Confederate blockade into Union territory, not only securing his freedom, the freedom of his family, and the freedom of all the slaves aboard, but he also got a pretty hefty commission for the ship, because it was a Confederate ship surrendering it to the Union Army. Now, but what's more amazing is what he did after that. Not only did he gain freedom for himself and family and his friends, but with his experience as a naval with ships, he became a naval officer and later became an army officer. He also was a very, very successful entrepreneur and had much success with his businesses and then turned to politics. So he did a whole lot, and especially for a person who was a former slave and in a deeply segregated South. His journey showcases the opportunities and the obstacles that African Americans faced during the postbellum time. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about economic opportunities and challenges. Now, Smalls was one of the lucky ones, right? Many Africans during the South entered what was called sharecropping. And while it seemed like an economical good thing for their own independence, it was often considered a form of economic slavery for those involved. And these were primarily former slaves and poor whites. And this led to a great cycle of debt, meaning there was no way for the average farmer or sharecropper to come out on top. They were always going to owe something to the landowner. Meanwhile, in the West, new markets were opening up thanks to the railroads. And as you can see here, we have at the top the before 1870, and then we have after. The expansion of the railroads brought people west, brought more opportunities west, and allowed the resources of the West to benefit all Americans. Now, Smalls, as an entrepreneur, saw these opportunities in the transportation and in business and demonstrated growing unequal economic landscape in the postbellum America. So he found a way to make to profit off of this, and he was one of the few former slaves to do this. However, there were some financial policies and financial things that caused hardships, and the separation between the what we call now middle class to the elites. This financial policies like the demonetization of silver, what some called the crime of 1873, impacted the economic stability, and it hit the farmers and the small businesses owners very hard, while the industrialists, the more wealthy folks, when we think of this era, they profited, and they had enough money to ride through any inconsistencies that there were. Again, those dependent on agriculture, including many African Americans, suffered under these economic constraints, and it caused a great deal of hardship. Okay. Now, Small's success wasn't just personal, it was a part of a bigger trend. The late 19th century saw African Americans moving into cities. It saw settlers moving westward in the communities, as detailed in David Danbom's sod busting, and industrialization was transforming the economy. This was the era where America was truly becoming a modern nation. After securing his freedom and becoming one of the most decorated members of the nation's military, both Army and Navy, you would think Smalls would be happy with what he accomplished. He was not. As a shining example of willpower and the hope for the future, Smalls was not only a successful businessman, but he soon rapidly rose in politics. And this is unique, because he did not have a formal education. He was very limited in the education provided to him, but he was a very intelligent man. And from 1869 to 1970, he served in the Carolina House of Representatives, and then from 1870 to 1874, he ran the Senate, and he was also elected 2.5 terms to the U.S. House of Representatives. This is a lot going on for this man. Today, anyone doing this would be considered a success. There'd be stories about him, news columns about him, and everything else. But picture back then, a slave who escaped from the South during the Civil War, turned his whole life around and became a shining example for everybody. I have a hard time getting out of bed without a cup of coffee, and this guy changed his whole life and the lives of many around him. All right, now, moving on. In conclusion, Robert Smalls is an inspiration. His story is more than just inspiring. It's a fundamental understanding of postbellum American and the idea of entrepreneurship and how to make a life for yourself. His journey reflects shifting economy, the fight for African American economic empowerment, and the broader push toward modernization, whether through sharecropping, industrial labor, or entrepreneurship. The late 19th century was a time of transformation, and Smalls was at the heart of it. So, by the way, here's the list of my primary and secondary sources. So I'm going to ask you, my humble historians, what do you think? How does Smalls' journey reflect the larger economic trends of the time? Is he an inspiration to you? Do you feel more motivated to do your homework? Anyway, so drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to check out my full list of resources. I'm going to provide this as well as the script for this little talk in the comments below, and I'm also going to link to my website on YouTube, my channel, so you can see how I present these videos and understand that, yep, some of them are terrible, but hey, if I feel I'm putting it out there to you, you can absolutely learn. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you very much. Bye.